Welcome to the diner where we serve up culture from a short order kitchen. Step up to the counter and let us serve you a slice of mental pie. Not a feast, just a snack, a deep thought to chew on from a big, meaty book. It'll go good with a cup of coffee, and then you can get back to the fray with a few beautiful new thoughts to think. It's season 2, and the Blue Plate special is still Timothy Petitsis' The Ethics of Beauty, that daunting doorstopper of popular theology that turns out to be amazingly accessible and powerfully relevant. This time we're talking about his essay on sex and gender, Only Priests Can Marry, the reconciliation of men and women in Christ. Roll up to the counter and have a couple bites of it with us.
Welcome to Season 2 of The Diner. Today we are going to be talking more about the ethics of beauty, and we are going to focus primarily on the chapter on gender, which is there's a lot. This is probably going to be quite a few episodes that we use to talk about this. But let's start with a quote, and then we will break that down and go from there. So here is what Dr. Petitsis says. Men and women alike are called to the same 3 offices, that of priest, to offer sacrifice, that of king, to lead and to fight, and that of prophet, to bring forth a word of insight. What differs between the genders is that the primary calling among these 3 offices for women is the prophetic office, while for men it is the kingly office. What unites men and women, though, is that they are called to fulfill their primary offices in a priestly way, that is, in a self-sacrificial way. Their first task is not, in a sense, to fulfill their gender calling, but a challenging paradox, to crucify that particular calling. The real way that Christian gender is inverted from the world's is that in Christ, gender not only dies and is reborn, but in being reborn, comes to a dynamic rest as the truest symbol not of its own life, but its partner's role and life. Thus, both men and women experience all 3 offices, but according to a pattern or way that is unique to each. This is how the genders are deeply reconciled in Orthodox life, in a loving act of mutual indwelling and self-offering. So, that's a big chunk of text there.
And it's completely foreign. It's completely foreign to anybody in our contemporary culture is going to come at this with. We're used to thinking of gender in terms of physical terms, sexuality and gender. We're used to thinking of gender and sexuality in terms of psychological terms as well, which I have a big problem with because we've been talking about this for many years. But what we aren't used to talking about is this idea of gender and sexuality in terms of spirituality and what that means. The closest thing that we have in contemporary culture is the sort of thing I think C.S. Lewis said, and it's a general thought, is that the soul is feminine in relationship to God as the masculine. But Petitsis isn't going there at all. He's starting with a completely new paradigm. And it's all based on this Orthodox conception of chiasm.
Yes. So we have to talk about that. What is chiasm? That's a word that I had not encountered until I read this book. And I know that it's a literary technique. I had never, like I said, I'd never heard of it. Now I see it all over the place. I see people mentioning it left and right. And it's, one of those things where once you know about it, suddenly it's everywhere. But what is it?
Well, the first time I encountered it actually wasn't in Ethics of Beauty, but it was still in an Orthodox context. It was in Donald Sheehan's The Shield of Psalmic Prayer. And that's one of Ancient Faith's books. And it goes, this was a man who, he's reposed since, may his memory be eternal, but he spent the greater part of his life praying the Psalms. The Shield of Psalmic Prayer was Sheehan's experience over decades of praying the Psalms with the church over and over and over again. And the more he prayed them, the more he realized that inside every psalm, inside the structure of the Psalms in general, was the shape of the cross. There's a physical shape in the Psalms themselves where you can see the theme progressing to the middle of the psalm, and then every line after that towards the end of the psalm echoes the first half of the psalm. So they become symmetrical, and not directly symmetrical, but thematically symmetrical. Verse by verse echo each other back and forth, so that you end up reading the Psalms not only in one direction, but in this back and forth reciprocal direction that forms the shape of the cross, which, as you said, once you see the shape of the cross, which is the reconciling of paradox, I mean, once you see it in one thing, you start to see it as the shape of reality. And this is one of the fundamental Christian truths, right?
Right. So can you give an example of a psalm, maybe one of the short psalms or something, where you can see this chiastic structure?
Okay, so one of the examples that he gives, he actually does this with several psalms. So I'd like to read you Sheehan's translation of Psalm 3, and then how he outlines the chiastic approach to the psalm. Lord, why do they that afflict me keep multiplying? Many are they that rise up against me. Verse 2, many are they who say to my soul, there is no salvation for him in his God. 3, but thou, O Lord, art my protector, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. 4, I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. 5, I lay down and slept, I awoke, for the Lord will protect me. 6, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who set themselves against me all around. 7, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast struck all those who are my enemies without cause. Thou hast broken the teeth of the sinners. And 8, salvation is from the Lord, and thy blessing is upon thy people. Now Sheehan goes on to say, the chiastic heart of the poem is lines 4 and 5. To cry out with your voice is to pray aloud to God, and therefore it is to sustain communion with God as divinely given inwardness. Note the verb tense in the second half of line 4. The Septuagint Greek and the Masoretic text Hebrew concur in using the past tense, thereby establishing firmly the vivid actuality of the divine response to David's prayer. So he's saying in verse 4, he says, and the Lord heard me from his holy hill.
Mm-hmm.
So by putting that in the past tense, he's saying that this is something that has already happened, that has a stability into its actuality. It's not going to change because it's happened and it's written in the book of time.
Okay.
All right. The significance is clear. At the Psalm's chiastic heart, David sustains his divinely given communion with God. He sustains his own inward aliveness that his enemy is seeking to destroy. And then here's how the chiastic pattern unfolds, because in lines 3 and 6, we see the immediate consequences of sustaining this inward communion. The third verse says, but thou, O Lord, art my protector, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. And the sixth verse says, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who set themselves against me all around. So you see, they're a mirrored structure, but when you read the verses in pair, it's not a secret message, but it unfolds. It unfolds a little bit more. And the same, if we move outward from the heart of the psalm, we say, many are they who say to my soul, there is no salvation for him in his God. And the response to that is, arise, O Lord, and save me, O my God, for thou hast struck all those who are my enemies without cause. Thou hast broken the teeth of the sinners. And again, the first and last verse of the psalm are, Lord, why do they that afflict me keep multiplying? Many are they that rise up against me. Salvation is from the Lord, and thy blessing is upon thy people. So the last pairing might seem a little bit opaque, but we're talking about different groups of people. We're talking about the group that rises up against me and the blessing that is upon that group of people. So this chiastic structure, where you can pair the verses of the Psalms until you reach the heart, is actually present throughout the entire book of Psalms. And it can it can become a real rabbit trail to go down through and unpack each psalm. And like I said, the meanings aren't hidden. We're not unlocking some sort of Gnostic knowledge here. But what we are doing is moving the pieces around so that we can see the Psalms in a new light and hear them with fresh ears,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in your reading, what have you read about the chiastic structure that really sticks out for you?
Well, for me, it's just that what sticks out the most is that idea of opposites coming to change places almost. I just was reading the other day about the rich man and Lazarus, and how, Lazarus he was poor, he was hungry, he had nothing. The rich man had everything. They both died. And then the rich man had nothing. He was in Hades. and Lazarus was in the bosom of Abraham, and he was now the one who was really rich. So I noticed that changing of places that happened, and you can see, once you know what to look for, you can really see it everywhere. I mean, even the basic message of the gospel, that God became man so that man might become God, that's a chiasm right there. And it's really, well, Petitsis talks about it as like the essence of the sacramental life. It's breathtaking once you start to see it. And even like in the Eucharist, for example, if we're talking about the sacramental life, we have the bread and wine becoming the body and blood of Christ to nourish us with the bread of life, right? So that they're changing places again, and it's
bread becomes body, becomes bread again.
Exactly. Like you said, it is the shape of reality, the cruciform shape, reconciling opposites, reconciling paradox.
Well, it's also, what it's not doing is revealing hidden knowledge. What it's doing is it's showing. Do you know the analogy I always use about paradox is that it's like 3D glasses, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put on the pair of glasses and one of your eyes is red and one of your eyes is blue. And you look at the comic book or the movie or whatever. If you only use one of your eyes, you get one picture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use the other one, you get the same picture, but it's slightly different.
Right.
It's it's mimicking eyesight. It's looking at the same image from a slightly different perspective, which
Mm-hmm.
is how we get depth.
Right.
See, like the analogy is perfect because paradox allows us to look at the same phenomenon from slightly different perspectives. And because of those two perspectives on the same thing, we can perceive it with spiritual depth. We're not revealing hidden knowledge. What we're doing is seeing something in its 3D actuality rather than the 2D flattened models we tend to encounter reality with initially.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we read the Psalms, like that Psalm that I was just reading, reading it front to end, we get one picture of the Psalm. It's not an erroneous picture of the Psalm, but when we read it back and forth, we create a slightly different reading of it. And then these two readings of them, which is not a different material, they allow us to perceive that the poem itself contains these great depths. And not only the poem, but reality in itself. I think this is something that when people talk about the symbolic nature of the world, this is something that I'm not sure is always clearly explained. The symbolic nature of the world is cruciform. Everything is chiastic. So you don't need to be Gnostic and look for all these esoteric symbols that help you encode reality correctly. We have the key. The key is the chiasm. The key is the cross. It is the eternal God hung on the tree of life from the foundation of the ages. We have these symbols that are the hermeneutic for reality, and they don't change the way reality looks. We are still looking at reality. We don't, for example, have to thwart our scientific knowledge in order for chiastic knowledge, in order for the chiasm to enlighten us. The only symbol that matters is the cross. And the cross is also not just an esoteric symbol or something abstract.
Mm-hmm.
The cross is the embodied life of Jesus Christ. He is a person. And so this is the key that opens up everything for us, because as we relate to Jesus, we enter into the chiastic reality, the chiastic awareness of reality.
Okay, I think this is a great place to stop, and we will come back and talk more about what exactly chiasm has to do with gender. So between now and our next episode, just think about where you've noticed chiasm, even if you didn't know what it was called. Like, have you seen it before in the Bible, in literature? And think about why it might be important to the discussion of gender.
Thanks for joining us at the Diner. If this season resonates with you, you may be interested to know that over the summer, I released the sex ed curriculum I created for my own teenagers. Sex Ed for Sane People is a high school level discourse on human sexuality that, among many things, is informed by the understanding explained here in Ethics of Beauty. It's interactive, meant to be customized by you for your students, and it's available for download on my website, lauraewolf.com.